In today's episode of the Beyond Pain podcast, the Joe sit down to discuss how to build a bigger bucket. Or, in other words, how can you teach your body how to handle more stress when you have an injury? We also talk about how to use this concept to help people get back to training or exercising the way that they want. And finally, dive into how to build confidence in your body's ability to load it and stress it. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also hope that you enjoyed this episode and all future episodes of the Beyond Pain podcast. And without further ado, here's today's episode. Welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Joe Gambino. You can find me on Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT. And your other lovely, beautiful co-host, Joe LaVacca. He's sitting somewhat across from me. At Strength and Motion _PT. Well, we got screens now. Feel free to reach out to us. We love having conversations with anyone who interacts with any of our content. So please do so. You can do that on Instagram. There's also an application form in the show notes. So if you are interested in working with us, you can fill that out and one of us will get back to you and we can have a conversation that way. And you can also watch this show on YouTube. Cups of Joe's _PT. And we do have an Instagram account for the podcast, simply Beyond Pain Podcast on Instagram. And that's it. And I was just telling Joe right before this started that I'm a little tired from the week, a little recovery from Mexico still happening. Hopefully your day is going better than mine. I was telling him I attempted to make myself a K-cup before the show and did not change out the cartridge. So I just poured it out and gave up on it.
Dude,
here we are.
I mean, that's a different podcast about what happened in Mexico.
We could have that. There'd probably be a couple episodes on that one.
That's gonna have to be an extra. That'll be the subscription only service.
Subscribe to us, and we'll give you access. But yeah. I mean, the footnotes for that is there's just way too much tequila. So
yeah,
I feel better.
Okay. That's okay.
I'm just mentally not fully ready for life. So.
Well, and did you have a time zone shift? Was it an hour or something?
It was only an hour. Yeah, so not bad.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Sometimes, depending on what you read and what you believe, an hour shift, it takes a week to recover from. I don't know. I've never really felt that. I mean, flying out to Colorado back and forth so much now, I guess for 8 or 9 years, I feel like I settle into a groove. My watch tells me a different story when I'm out here, though, which is always interesting. But like you just said, it's always context. Like, Court and I, when we get together, it's like, oh, hey, let's go grab a cocktail after work, or let's go grab a beer after work. And, that's not probably something I'm doing regularly in the city. So, yeah, I could feel a little bit of the fuzz today. We had a great day yesterday. We had our first guest ever on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's right.
There's lots of reasons to celebrate. So Court and I did a little celebrating last night, and it was just a good night. And then that leads to some tough mornings, but I'm here. I'm ready to rock. And so are you. So yes. What are we talking about today, dude?
And this is that was actually perfect, Joe, because it kind of pushes us right into today's episode. So this is episode 9. Episode 8 was Tyler. I thought it was a great conversation that we had with him. And there were times where we started to talk about, capacity and kind of how we bring somebody back to, whatever their fitness level is or whatever it is that they're looking to accomplish with their bodies, right? So I'm kind of going to throw just, it almost feels like a somewhat of a continuation, but I'm going to throw this question to you, and I'm curious to how you think about things. But I think you even mentioned it in like 2 episodes ago where, a question that people have for us, right, is how long does this process take, or how can we even help them? So the question for you is, when it comes to actually helping somebody tolerate more stress, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that, it goes without saying first, it's always an individual level. The person who has been training and maybe accustomed to delivering stress to their body, we can probably always push a little bit more. Let's keep the conversation to probably my more typical client who comes in with fear, comes in with avoidance strategies, very hesitant to pick up load. I mean, let alone move. If I can convince them that movement is good by starting things, very stability based, like just on the table. Can we start just moving and wiggling on your back, on your stomach? Then can we take that up to hands and knees? Then can we take that up to like a tall kneeling position and then all the way up to standing? So there's always remnants in my thought process. And that remnant there is probably what I took from SFMA, right? Like just starting in these, like what they would say is like a 4x4 matrix, increase the stability demands throughout the position, but you can still do any motion you want in a prone or supine position or a quadruped position. So if it's sensitivity to movement, that's kind of where I'll start them. I'll break that movement down into pieces. Back pain's common. Everyone can kind of relate to that. So let's just say if they're apprehensive or having a lot of sensitivity to forward bending, I might start the process on the table just with like some knees to chest. Keep that lever arm short, right? So knees are going to be bent. Then maybe gradually increase the lever arm by having the leg go out a little bit wider. And then maybe have them start to do like a little curl up or a little roll up there. And then just kind of keep gradually building off of that. That could kind of go to like some more specific cat-cow drills, again, with their legs in different positions. And then maybe just gradually sitting and flexing forward before we go up to something like standing, right? Now, if it's more from a weight perspective, this is where I'll typically just play with body weight, right? If we're doing like some lower body tasks, like I want them to maybe think about squatting or deadlifting, I'll ask them their body weight and I'll typically take like 25% of that, right? And usually the number's fairly small. And I'm like, hey, if we took a quarter of your body weight and put it on the floor, do you think you would be comfortable lifting this weight or kind of manipulating this weight in some way, shape, or form? Sometimes that answer is no, right? And I'm pretty respectful of that. And then I usually will just say, okay, well, what weight would you think you're kind of comfortable with? And then people say something like 5 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever. And okay, fine. Let's build up to then a quarter of your body weight if we can. Here's 5 pounds. Just, lift this off the floor. And then we can maybe talk about just some easy things in terms of form and technique. And then that 5 pounds, builds a little bit of confidence, builds them up to 10, and then maybe we kind of gradually go up to 25% of their body weight. The fun thing lately I have been doing is thanks to the tin deck. Right? Do you have a tin deck in your clinic, Joe?
I do not, because I don't have a
Oh, well, you do a lot of virtual. You do a lot of virtual.
Yes.
So I'll actually put them, I'll rig something up on the tin deck, right? Like just maybe like a handle, bring them over to the cable column, and I'll just have them pull on that thing. Right. And a tin deck is essentially a force reader, right? So it can read in pounds, it can read in all these different units of measurement. And then people will pull, and I'll tell them, just pull at your safest, whatever you feel comfortable with. They give a little tug, and I'm like, okay, what do you think the force you just put into this, device was? And they'll always underestimate. It's like 10 pounds, 20 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And then I turn the camera around, I turn my phone around because the phone will actually give me an output. And it's like 90 something pounds, 100 in this pounds. And they're like, wow, I didn't even know I was putting that much force, into the movement. And then I say, okay, well, what do you think about that when you've been now using 10-pound weights in the gym, or you and your trainer have been, really underloading, the areas? It seems like you can tolerate a lot more stress. And then it sort of proves it to them, right? But that's only like within the clinic, right? So I guess knowing that you're more virtual now, or really only virtual, how are you doing some sort of like prove it stuff or progression stuff for people in the virtual space?
So there are a couple of things that I like. And I think that it always comes down to whenever someone's in pain, looking to get back to something, like first step is like desensitizing the system, right? Bringing down pain, building confidence. Because it's true. I mean, there's a lot of people that come through that are very unsure that they can take the next step, right? If you've been, I've had people who have had a conversation with me and they've like, yeah, this has been going on for years. I've seen so many people. And the biggest part about making a decision to even work with me is just to be like, yeah, this is actually possible for me to get better, right? Like that's the hurdle that ends up happening more often than not. So I agree. Kind of like that initial part to building, a more resilient body is desensitizing the system, because pain will ultimately kind of affect things. And if we can't get somebody completely out of pain, then we need to reduce it as best as we can so that this way they can start to load it and start to kind of push through. But in this environment, it's more of a, I think every episode so far we've touched on the pain guidelines that I have. So it's asynchronous, my communication with whoever I'm working with, right? It's more often than not happening on like a direct call with somebody. It's like, go do this and then let me know how you feel. And then based off of that, we either hop on a call to talk about it, or we navigate it through like, sending each other videos back and forth, or messaging. So that's kind of how we do it. And I think what I like about the environment is that it teaches people to have more control over it too, right? Because they're doing it on their own. They're kind of by themselves, and they have to come back to me as like the soundboard. And as long as they're comfortable being in an environment, if they're able to do it and navigate it and then come to me where I just give them advice and they go back and do it on their own, right? It creates like an independency for them, right? Because they're not relying on me in a clinic to be like, can I do this? Can I do that? Right? They start to learn to explore on their own and come back to me. And now we kind of, it's the back end kind of coaching that we kind of do to navigate some of the uncertainties, right? And it's more of me helping give them permission in a sense to keep pushing or keep loading, right? I had somebody I'm working with and he's trying to get back to playing tennis, and our first, we're maybe about our 8th week in, I think, at this point. And he's having, like he gets sore after some of our sessions, but he's slowly tolerating more and more stress. Like I can push him a little bit harder and he can push himself a little bit harder, and just got him back onto like, just hitting balls like very, very gentle. He told me he was very cautious. He's like, I felt my Achilles, I felt my knee, I felt my wrist, but I felt really good doing it, right? So we're building this like confidence slowly to kind of get him out and doing more. And if we didn't start this journey, I don't even think he would have been remotely close to even thinking he could do that, right? So there's a lot of these like, and he's one of those people that getting on the like to make the decision was hard because he's seen so many people and he's worked with a lot of people and he's knowledgeable. He's working to be, he has the certifications to be a trainer. He just doesn't feel confident in his body to go out and coach people at this point. So, he's knowledgeable on all that front. And like the decision for him was like, is something actually going to work? Can I even take that next step forward? And it's slow, right? It's happening. And each time we talk, each session that he does, right, it's more and more confidence. I think that's exactly what you're alluding to. Like, how do we start to build this trust in your body to even feel like you can start to push the your body a little bit more?
Yeah, that permission word I think is huge that you used, right? Because I think sometimes the biggest thing that I can do for someone is just tell them it's okay to move, and it's okay to load, and it's okay to do the things that they're avoiding. And sometimes I feel like that kind of is a cop out, but then people leave so relieved and kind of tell me, oh, I didn't know that I was even allowed to do this. My doctor may have told me to avoid everything, things that I've maybe seen or read, or my neighbor, my family member, they all told me, stay away from pain, eliminate pain. And I think that, again, there's probably certain times where we just, maybe want to chill out. And, I think that goes into this whole idea of the cup of stress and the rehab buckets. And I know these were some things that we talked to Tyler about a little bit yesterday, like you said. Now, when we're then building all these sort of like things with capacity and giving people permission to move, and, I was just kind of given one example of just some progressions or regressions that we can use there, but there's so many more. There's tempo, and there's the apparatus of the weight, there is positions, there's the environment in which we're performing those things. I mean, when you're thinking about these buckets, do you explain the bucket analogy to people? Is that something that you use a lot when early in the phase of rehab, or is that something you bring in later on? Because that's a common analogy in our space now, and I really like it. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I'm just trying to think of like, when do you incorporate that into your progressions with movements?
I use the analogy when it comes to people who are dealing with pain, and more so like if they have the questions around like how does all this stuff work, right? Like I don't, education comes in a lot of different forms of fashion, and it just like the way I educate just comes within the context of how we're interacting, and I get pretty deep with people as far as like how things are affecting their lives, right? Like before I even start to work with somebody, I ask like, I've had people tell me like nobody has ever asked me questions like this before. So and I feel like
Yeah.
that's how like it's surprising, right? Because as people who are helping people with pain in the medical profession, even as fitness coaches, right? Like we should be trying to figure out like how you can only help somebody when you know how it's either impacting their life and what they want to accomplish, right? Like you can otherwise like you're just throwing stuff at the wall. But if I do the bucket analogy for people who don't know, and I do use it often in education, is that you can imagine all the stresses in life, and if you have your body can only tolerate so much stress, and that can be physical, that can be emotional, that can be a number of different forms, right? And if we were to put all the stress, and that stress was water, that bucket is your capacity, you know, once the bucket is completely full, right, and that water would then overflow, that would be at that point, right, like your body's going to have a hard time recovering, pain can happen, things like that. So two things that we can do to help someone kind of get out of pain is either right, reduce the stress, right, whether that's from a load, like taking painful things out, if it's mental health, right? Getting help from a mental health perspective, things that can help remove water from the bucket, that's going to allow you to tolerate more stress overall. And then there are things from a movement perspective we can do that's going to help improve the size of your bucket so you can just put more stuff in it, right? So that's in essence, kind of like building that bigger cup. That's how we can start to allow somebody to maybe they still have the same pain level, but they can do more activities, right? Oftentimes, right, like we have people who come in like, oh, I have pain, so I stopped doing X, Y, and Z, and then 3 months later they're saying, well, I had pain when I did this, and I'm like, well, you had pain and it's like barely anything, and you're still going to the gym and you're still doing X, Y, and Z. And last time you told me this, you had to sit on the couch for 3 days, right? So it's like a
Yeah.
very different type of pain, right? And that's
Right.
what we're talking about as we're building these bigger buckets. Your body can tolerate more stuff. That is the essence, right? Saying that even though you still have pain, right, you're significantly more resilient. And I find that always the hardest part with people navigating pain is because it's so internal, you always feel it. It's hard to almost like escape from it, especially when you've been dealing with it for a long time. And you have to go back and look at these like, well, what can I do now that I couldn't do in the past, right? And those are the hints that start to tell you that, like, even though there's pain here, right, we're still taking 100 steps forward, right? And we're well on the way. And how do we start to figure out those little nuances?
You know, the thing I've been adding to the sort of like bucket analogy is the bottom of the bucket. And a lot of people, when they come in, especially if they worked with other providers, and that analogy being so common and useful, and I think easy for people to relate to, they're like, yeah, I've heard of the bucket stuff. And, I've been doing the mental health thing. I've been doing the breathing. I've been doing my zone 2 runs, all these things that might take water out, as you said, and then simultaneously build up the bigger cup. And they're like, well, and, I still don't understand why, I'm still stuck. And then that's when I just kind of point to the bottom of the bucket. I'm like, look, we can be taking things out and building things up. But if you don't have a bottom of the bucket, nothing's going to be retained, right? And then you can't progress the way that you're thinking, because every time you go to move the bucket, everything falls out, and then you have to sort of like start all over again. So I think we are the bottom of the bucket, right? Like the coaching and the programming are the bottom, and the person that we're trying to fill up or build is the cup itself. And the analogy works for me in 2 ways, because it kind of puts us at the bottom, right, of this hierarchy, and like the person is above us, and we're trying to build the life of that person. But I think that's why when people are always maybe, scouring around the internet and thinking like, well, I can just ask ChatGPT, like, what's a good running program? What's a good this? What's a good that? And that's all good and well. But then what are you going to do if and when the cup overflows again? Or what are you going to try to do when you want to transition into something else, right? That's where programming and I think coaching and maybe even those chats, as you were mentioning before, like in between sessions and after sessions, is so valuable, because it starts to really build that education. So yeah, I kind of might consider myself now the bottom of the bucket in the
I
best way
have
possible.
a hard, well, what I would think is a hard question for you.
Ooh.
So, I always try to think about like, think back like, okay, if I'm, the way I kind of go about things and what I'm doing, what makes it effective, right? If I have some, I've had people who've seen many providers, and then they come to me, and then all of a sudden I can help them, right? I don't feel like I do anything special, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like hard because I don't know if like the things I do, they're just like I have my system, it seems normal, and I would just assume that everybody does things in a similar light, like maybe different, like everyone's a little different, but not too far off. So I have a hard time like pinpointing like this is, why I think someone's more successful with me than they were with somebody else. So I want to throw that question to you is like, what do you think about what you do that can help somebody who's really struggled with pain, who has struggled with providers in the past, and like why do you think you maybe get through to them or help them get to that next level? You are the philosopher, so I think you might have an answer to
I
this.
lost you for 1 second there. Could you
Where did you
repeat
lose
the
me?
last part of your? Yeah, I just the last part of your question I didn't hear.
So the question really is what do you think makes you or gives you the ability to, or what do you think is the quality that helps you help a client who has really struggled
Got it.
with pain for a long period of time or with other providers? And I feel like you might be able to have a good answer because you are the philosopher of the group. So I'm hoping.
It's not going to be the answer that you're hoping for. I really just think it's patience. Um, I've come to a point in my career working with people where you're not going to outpatience me. And I think because of that, I am prepared for anything. And my expectation is, well, you're going to come, we're going to work together, and you will get better. Like in 8 weeks, in 12 weeks, in 16 weeks, however long you decide to stay, you will be stronger, you will be smarter, you will be more conditioned than the day we started together. I can guarantee you that. What makes it different now, and I think the reason why I'm able to help more people and maybe more consistently, is when these down days happen, I expect them, you know? And I think when I was a younger clinician, those would really throw me off just as much as they would throw off patients. Oh, we were doing so well. Oh man, and then we had this pain come back. Dang, I think I gotta try everything all over again. Like that, clearly that plan didn't
Hmm.
work. Where now, knowing the natural, history of things, knowing the prognosis of things, I think we sort of are trying to build people into the best versions of themselves now rather than recreate who they were in the past, right? And I think that's what really, to me, rehab has shifted to. So being prepared for the bad and then being patient and waiting for the good, I think is probably the biggest thing that people will tell me I do a little bit differently. Because, and I'll give you an example that happened to me last week. I was working with a client who's had back pain. When we met, it was December. He could barely put on his shoes. Okay, fine. We go through our program. He's working hard. He's working out now 4 or 5 days a week. He's really crushing it. He just became a member of the 200-pound squat club, right? Like 2 weeks ago. That was the highest he's ever gone to. Things are rolling, man. Things are rolling. Then, with our little next phase of programming, I'm like, well, you know what, you're doing so good, but I want to kind of build the bottom base of your squat just a little bit more. I think we can work on that a little bit. So let's do some pauses. We're going to deload the bar by like 25, 30%. So it'll feel pretty light. And then I want you to just kind of just take a 2-second pause in the bottom. And, first set goes perfect, no problems. Second set, he stands up, grabbing that same spot in his back. And immediately I knew what happened. And I'm just waiting for him to talk to me. And he's like, yeah, that whole that spasm I felt back in December is back. And I'm like, okay, take me through it. What are you feeling? Right. And just very calmly. And this is, sort of the thing where when I'm teaching, I think the biggest advice I give to clinicians a lot of the time is remove your emotion. Because if you can remove your emotion, you can begin to think clearly and help this person problem solve, because they already have too many emotions. right? And then really that's going to shut down a lot of their ability to think clearly. So you have to react stone faced, right? If he popped up out of that squat, I usually kind of wait for their reactions, but I'm not selling it. And if they're happy, I'm like, then I grab the smile, I do the fist pump, little high five. I'm like, there we go. But I'm always waiting for them first, right? To see what happens. So I ask him, point blank, we go through a couple tests. I'm like, what would you have done, if I wasn't here with you? And I loved his answer because I think this is like the accumulation. He's like, well, you've taught me enough where I think I would have just taken some weight off the bar, all right, and then tried it again. And then if I didn't, I probably would have just skipped this exercise and went on to the next one. And I was like, oh, dude, that is absolutely perfect. All right. That's exactly what I would have coached you to do. If you text me or you called me and you were at the gym, I would have told you the exact same thing. Let's reduce intensity. Let's try again. If not, let's move on and still get a good workout in. And then he stayed. We got a great workout, shirts pouring sweat, at the end of it. And he was like, I'm really glad I did that. Now, flash forward to a day later, I check in on him. He's like, dude, it's even hard getting out of bed. And I'm like, all right, what's the plan? And he's like, I'm going for a walk. I'm going to keep it low aerobic. I'm going to just stay moving, find things that make me feel good, as opposed to staying in bed for 3 weeks like I would have done in December, right? And then that's it. It was just patience, right? I didn't rewrite his program that day. I didn't tell him to stop doing things the rest of the week. He knew enough. I was, also aware that a flare was bound to happen. Statistically, they're happening to 80 to 90% of people. And it's during the course or during the early phases of rehab. So I think the advice I'd give to clients and clinicians is just stay the course, remain patient. And I think that's the biggest shift in my practice. But what about you? I mean, that's not like really a sexy answer. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I took this course, I developed a system. It was just like being patient.
No, I like that, and I think that is part of that, like being that soundboard for them, right? Like you need to be able to be here, right, and be understanding of kind of what's going on and how can you start to navigate um, kind of all those things that go around and help them realize that there's still confidence in your body. Because I'm like, those are the times where I think flare-ups happen the most, right? They start to feel better, you start to push it, and then all of a sudden a flare-up happens, right? Because you exceed, right, with that bucket. But I think that's a great thing, because if you're feeling willing to like go push your body, right, with or without me being there, that is a sign that you're making good progress, and you're going to take a couple steps back, but we need to figure it out. Hopefully recovery is usually faster than it's been in the past, and then get you back on track and just get you right back to where you were, and then beyond that. But that's it. I think what people and what I've been told is just like me being able to, like, if someone's like on like up here, right, because they're stressed and all this stuff that's kind of going on, and I'm sitting back in my chair and I'm processing it and I'm just talking to them, right, and like, okay, asking them more questions and getting deeper and helping them make decisions as well, not just like, I think I don't freak out and I try to change the program. I change it if it's necessary. And then I try to help them, so there's a conversation at that point, right? And see where that ends up taking us. So, maybe that is it. Maybe it is some special magic in my programming. I don't know. But I just always have found that it's like, I just don't know, right? What is it's hard to pinpoint, right? Like what it is. And I've had people ask me like, oh, why can you help me versus somebody else? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, basically, I think maybe the thing that I do is just have that trust with somebody, right? From the way our first interactions all the way through. It's that trust, it's the soundboard, it's being calm, cool, and collected, and just being able to guide them. But who knows? I just figured I'd ask where your mind was there, because I feel like that's always, what makes
I think that you
yeah. Go ahead.
Trust is huge. I mean, and outcomes. I mean, we have enough data now to suggest that alliance and trust within the patient-provider relationship enhances outcomes. So you don't have to write like this unbelievable program. You can give the same program that another PT or healthcare provider gave that client, but just do it with that background of trust and under that guidance of like maybe empathy and compassion, where, that's what I just heard from you too, and it kind of echoed my sentiment that I usually would tell clinicians too, is like, remove yourself from that painful reaction or the painful experience, right? Just go back into deductive reasoning. Go back to being a scientist, right? And you can still express concern without overreacting.
Mm-hmm.
And now having, a child that's relatively young, I'm sure if she's anything like Avery, she was falling a lot, slamming things, teetering off the edge of kitchen counters and things like that. But when she falls, typically, again, it's always our reaction that will scare them, right? And if we come running over and we're like, oh my God, are you okay? I'll pick them up, like, rubbing the spot, right? I think it shows them, hey, like that was bad, right? Like I am fragile. Like, oh no, if I fall, something really bad could happen to me. And then what would happen if daddy wasn't there, right? So it's the same thing with the clients, right? When they have pain, being able to empathize, but then also then switching that into sort of like a separate compassion and just saying, let's problem solve this together. This is expected. This is what was going to happen. And let me ask you these few questions and then tell me, what we think about after those types of questions. And when people have those little flares or painful experiences and they're in front of me, I could have ran over to him and be like, dude, all right, cool. No more squats today. We're shutting it down. Let's go. Let's just rub on that back. Let's do some breath work, and look, I'd be prepared to do that if the pain became unbearable. But at the same time, I want to relay to clients that I'm not afraid of pain, right? And neither do you have to be. And just because you had a little bit of setback today, we still have a new floor, right? Because we're 6 months removed from where we started, right? And our floor back then was you being able to put shoes on, right? Now our floor is, 200-pound pause squats that we can build up to. And at the same time, you're, like you said, when these clients are having some reactions, their ability to just continue to move forward, lateralize, pick something else. And that in and of itself is empowering because, look, I don't know what your training was like this week, but you're still recovering from Mexico. I imagine it wasn't like, PR city, right? And you probably wouldn't even put yourself through that knowing like how you were feeling, getting back on track with sleep and recovering. So, and I do the same thing here. Hey, I either have it sometimes with the altitude change and the time zone change, and then sometimes I don't, right? But it's just about meeting yourself where you're at, know when to progress, and then having, us there as coaches and guides to facilitate that process.
I really like that. I was going to ask one more question, but I think maybe to wrap it up, I will say this. And think about like, my fitness cap going back on here, right? So we have somebody who's squatting 200 pounds, right? And you're like, well, let's bring it back to some pauses, right? Because we want to develop some specific tissue adaptations here, right? If somebody in a deloaded situation with some pause squats, where we're putting some extra, like we're really making them have to force and control and load, right? Some of these like not end range, right? But the bottom of their squat, and something pops up. Well, what do we think is going to happen if we never did that, right? But now you decide, let's go try 215, 225, 235, right?
Sure.
You're missing some of that foundational stuff too, right? So you challenge them in a specific way. You had this outcome, and now okay, well, maybe there was something here, right, that still needs to be worked on, tweaked on too. It's not just like the alliance, right? There are still mechanical things that happen, and now you can kind of fine tune this and work on these qualities at the same time, right? So we put all these things together, and I think that's where maybe that's where the sweet spot is, right? We have all this kind of like therapeutic alliance, right? We have the trust, we know how to navigate pain, right? And that's part of it, but then we also understand what's kind of going on here from a movement perspective, right? We both train, we both work hard, we both had pain, we both had to navigate it. We've worked with I don't even know how many people up until this point. And we, like once you know that stuff, right? Like now we can be, I think, a little bit more specific, right? And say, okay, when this happens, right? Like now we know for the next time we're coming, right? We need to build up these qualities to make sure we can continue on that journey and beyond it. So I think I'll leave it there. Any final thoughts, Joe?
Wrap up point. No, it's a good wrap up point. I think Well said, my friend. Well said.
Thank you. I think there's between last episode and this one, I think there's two themes that keep popping up, right? It's like, don't try to fix it, right? We need to be the guide, right? We're not the fixers. And the second one just left my mind, so I'm gonna, I'll leave it there, which is maybe one takeaway from it.
Maybe I'll fill in the second one for you. Is that those alliances in the work that you put in the beginning, right, gives you money in the bank and flexibility when the bad times pop up, that this person in front of you is still going to trust you, right? So when we can say, like you said, like, hey, you know what, like there is still something, right, that I saw at the bottom of the squat at 200 pounds that I didn't see at 195, where I was like, hey, you know what, this would probably be a good time to deload and back off and work on something. And then lo and behold, that maybe there was something to work on there, right? And then now, again, my ability to say, hey, look, I was expecting this. We know that this is going to happen, right? And then now, because we have that trust and alliance, but here's how we're going to move it forward. Like now we know exactly what we need to work on again. And that's cool. And that could set us up for the next 6-8 weeks, right?
And I would say it's not just the trust that like we're there, right, to help kind of navigate this stuff and the trust in us, but also the trust in themselves, right? Like this is a flare up and you're going to process whatever you're feeling, right? But then thinking it through and knowing, okay, I'm in a better place and I can continue on my journey. And I think that's the more important thing, right? Because if they don't have the trust, right, that they can do it and kind of continue to get better, and this flare up is just a blip in the journey, I think then there's a whole lot more that kind of needs to be done for that person, right? Because in order for them to be independent, be on their own, right, they need to be able to make that mental switch to being able to trust their body that they're going to be able to get back and then be able to continue to push.
Sure.
All right, Joey boy. Well, I thought that was a great conversation, listeners. I hope you thought the same. Joe, I love you. Listeners, I love you.
I love you.
And if you made it this far in the episode and still listening, extra love for you. Till next time.
Have a good one.